So what's he going to do? Well, he comes up with a plan. Being God, he comes up with a very good plan. He starts by recruiting a group of people, starting with this guy, Abraham, in about 2000 BC. He shows up to this guy, Abraham, and he says, Abraham, I've chosen you for something very important. I'm going to take you, and you're going to have descendants. You're going to have kids, and they're going to have kids, and so on and so forth, as you do with the kids and the producing. And I'm going to do something awesome through you guys. And eventually, I'm going to use your family to be a blessing to the whole world. And one of the primary things he wanted them to do, this Abraham and his descendants, was have them produce a record of his stuff, his thoughts, his ideas, things about him. So this is the Bible. This is especially the Old Testament, which includes a lot of statements about right and wrong, about morality. It includes truths about God, what he's like. It says things like God is slow to anger. He's abounding in compassion. But he doesn't let sin go unpunished. So these statements about God's character. But most important for our purposes tonight, this record of God's stuff includes a series of predictions. Specifically predictions of two people. First, a person called the King Messiah. Messiah means the sent one, the chosen one of God, who was going to be a king. There are passages that predict this person who's going to take over as a king. He's going to reign forever. So not just a king who's going to have the throne for a couple years, but a king who's going to reign forever. And a king who's going to defeat God's enemies. There are all these predictions. For example, in Isaiah 9, we read about this person. For to us, Israel, a child is born. To us, a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. So he's a king. And he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He'll reign on David's throne. David was an important king of Israel. And over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. So an eternal king. So that's the King Messiah. But there are other predictions about another person. Oh yeah, so there's a Messiah. He's going to be sometime in the future, after Abraham. But then there's this other person called the servant of the Lord. Very different from the King Messiah. The servant of the Lord is going to come and suffer. He's going to pay for sin. This servant of the Lord is going to take on the punishment for human wrongdoing. And he's going to die badly. It's not going to be pretty for the servant of the Lord. You can read about him in passages like Isaiah 52 and 53. It says, see, my servant will prosper. He'll be highly exalted, but many were amazed when they saw him. His face was so disfigured, he seemed hardly human. And from his appearance, one would scarcely know he was a man. That's a bad deal. You're looking pretty ugly when it's hard to recognize you as a human. It says he was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. He was going to suffer badly. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. But, this is important, he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. So this servant of the Lord is going to take on this punishment for the sake of people, so that they can receive forgiveness from God. It says, unjustly condemned, he was led away. No one cared that he died without descendants, or that his life was cut short in midstream. But he was struck down for the rebellion of God's people. It was the Lord's good plan to crush him and cause him grief. Yet, when his life is made an offering for sin, he will have many descendants. When he sees all that's accomplished by his anguish, he'll be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for man to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins. So again and again, you see this person who's going to come and suffer, pay for sin, but die in a really bad way. So you've got these two predictions. A king, a righteous king who's going to rule forever, and then this servant who's going to get pummeled and pay for sin. Okay? So when Jesus showed up on the scene, the Jewish people, Israel, knew about both of these people, these predictions in the Old Testament. Because remember, they'd been the people that God wanted to preserve the record of these predictions. And then Jesus shows up. And at that time, the Jewish people didn't really know what to make of those servant passages. They didn't really know how to interpret those or what to think about those. However, they were very excited about King Messiah. Because here was going to come this king who was going to take over and set up a kingdom where the Jewish people were going to be cared for. They were going to, this king was going to defeat God's enemies, so they were really looking forward to King Messiah showing up. And so when Jesus came and started preaching publicly, he started saying things like, hey guys, God's kingdom is here. It's right now. And people went, yes, King Messiah. The Jewish people had been held under many governments, had been suffering, had been oppressed. And so the idea that there was going to be a king who was going to put them back on top was very exciting to them. So when Jesus started saying, God's kingdom is here, they were pumped. But they didn't know what to do about the other passages. Interestingly, when Jesus showed up, though, Satan was very confused. You see passages like this one in Matthew 8 where it says the demons, these demons that were tormenting this person said, why are you interfering with us, Son of God? And then they say, have you come here to torture us before God's appointed time? In other words, they knew that this Messiah was supposed to come, but they thought he was early. They're like, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to come yet. Messiah's supposed to come later. What are you doing here? Quit bothering us. Quit hassling us. It's not time for us to be hassling. The hassling is later, not now. So he's confused. Why are you early? And the reason they thought that is that they thought that King Messiah and the servant of the Lord were two different people. But what they didn't realize, guys, and this is a big deal. You see that? Did you see what just happened? Oh, look what just happened. I'll show you. See this? See this line? It makes it look like they're two different people. But watch. They're not two different people.
What a twist.
They're the same person.
What a twist.
That's the surprise. That's the trick. Now, you might not understand why that's a big deal. That's okay. I'm going to tell you why that's a big deal. Jesus was both the servant of the Lord and King Messiah. Okay? And here's how it works. The first time Jesus showed up, in about the year 0, the Jesus that we read about in the New Testament, that was Jesus showing up as the servant of the Lord, the suffering servant, who came to suffer, to pay for sin, and to die badly. He was crucified to take on the punishment for human wrongdoing. So that was right here. This already happened. We got that one. It happened. But later, Jesus said he would come back as the King Messiah, take over as the king, reign forever, and defeat all of God's enemies. So it's predictions about two arrivals of the same person. This is like, let's say there was a big football game at the end of the year at your school, okay? And I came up to the student body at the pep rally or whatever, I don't know. And I said something like, listen, that guy, no offense, guy, but that guy who's never played one snap in his entire high school career, you're finally going to get some playing time tonight. I got good news for you. I'm calling it. I'm predicting it. Also, I have another prediction. There's going to be an incredible last-second touchdown, and you will win at the last possible second of this game. Okay? And everyone's like, yeah, woo, for the win! And but nobody's thinking about the guy who's going to get the playing time. The loser guy who's never gotten a snap in his life. But they've heard now that he's finally going to get into the game. And then later on at the game, there are 4 seconds left, down by 5 points, and you've got one play, and coach is feeling sorry for the loser guy who's never played. He's kind of lost hope. So he sends in the guy for the last play of the game. He's like, whatever, go take your last snap. He's quitting anyway. He's retiring. And the guy comes in. He's a scrawny kid. He's sniffling as he comes in. He doesn't. His uniform doesn't fit. And the other team's like, this guy, And so they don't even cover him. And the last play of the game, the guy just goes bounding down the field. The quarterback heaves the ball down in the end zone, and the guy who's never played a snap in his entire high school career catches the ball for a touchdown at the end of the game. And all of a sudden everyone's like, whoa, those two predictions that I would have thought had nothing to do with each other turned out to be the exact same. They were the same prediction. Loser guy gets a snap, touchdown to win the game. Same guy. And everyone's like, mind blown. Right? It's like this. That's what this is. They thought, no way, this could possibly be the same person. Didn't even enter anybody's mind. And so God surprised everybody by having the servant and the king be the same person. So why is this important? Well, we read later in another book of the Bible, not later, another book of the Bible, it says, "We declare God's wisdom, a mystery that's been hidden and that God destined for our glory," meaning for humans' benefit, "before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it." Satan did not anticipate this plan. "For if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory." If it had occurred to Satan that Jesus might be the Messiah who was going to reign forever and defeat him, he would not have played right into God's plan to have the Messiah crucified as the servant. So it was God tricking Satan into playing right into his hand. In another place it says, "And having disarmed," meaning defeated, "the powers and authorities, God made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross." In other words, by having this plan be hidden and then having Satan play right into it, God basically honed Satan so bad. I mean, like nearly as bad as last week's rap album. Almost. Not quite that, but like pretty bad. No, actually it was way worse. Don't worry, it was way worse. This was so bad because when Jesus showed up and started preaching, God's kingdom is here, Satan thought to himself, the Messiah's here, I'm going to take him down. And when I defeat the Messiah that God sent, I win. But that was exactly what God wanted to happen. And so when Satan finally realized what had happened, he was like, oh no. He had no idea what he had just done by accident. And what this means is that Satan's lies, the lies he's been telling about God since the beginning of human existence, his lies are exposed as being untrue. So for example, when Satan says things like, God is just trying to keep you down, he's only looking out for his interests. Trying to get in a relationship with God, that's just about him wanting to control you. Well, that can't be true. Because if that were true, then God would not have taken it upon himself to come into the world and die for humans, for our benefit. If he were just about himself, he would never come into the world as Jesus and take on the horrible, horrible punishment that humans deserve for sin, if he didn't have somebody else's interest in mind besides his own. So that can't be true. If you look at the cross, if you look at Jesus, you realize God is not out to look just for his own interests. Or, if you follow God, he'll ruin your life. He wants bad things for you. He wants to cancel your fun. He wants to mess up your life. Well, again, no. If you look at the cross, what the cross shows us is that God came into the world and at his own expense wanted to give us new life. We saw last week that God came into the world as Jesus so that we could receive a new spiritual life, be new creatures. And then it says we become God's masterpiece. We're recreated for good works that God prepared in advance for us to do. And he proves his love for us by way of the cross, by way of sending Jesus to be the suffering servant. So this is really important in showing us that Satan's lies about God are untrue. Paul goes on in this passage and he says, because of Christ and our faith in him, we can now come fearlessly into God's presence, assured of his glad welcome. So whereas before, when we were separate from God, like we studied last week, we knew that somewhere inside of us we know that we're guilty before God. And that's a fearsome thing, to have God's justice bearing down on us. But by coming into the world and dying in our place, and then giving us his forgiveness and giving us new life, he assures us that we're good with him, that he has given us forgiveness, that he said, you're okay with me. We are at peace now, you and me. And so he says, because of Jesus and this plan that God carried out, we can be confident that God is going to welcome us into heaven. So for us, the mystery, this plan that God carried out, means that we will be with God forever. And we can be confident of it. Because he predicted it, and then he carried out his plan.